So once again, I'll just start by saying I'm Aviva O'Neill, Executive Director of Great Basin National Park Foundation. I'm very excited to have this program tonight with three amazing women who know so much about caves and the caves in Great Basin National Park. This program is, well, I guess it's the sixth one in our virtual speaker series that the goal is to connect people from wherever they are to Great Basin National Park, because it's hard to get to the park, and so you don't have to necessarily, we want you to come here, but if you can't come here, we want you to be able to connect with the park, learn about the park, understand the value of the park from wherever you live. So it's the 40th anniversary of Great Basin National Park this year in October. So we'll be continuing to do these programs monthly. And so we have the ones set up all the way through September. Claire is going to put some stuff in the chat that is going to give you information as far as future programs. And then also, if you've missed any of the previous programs and you would like to watch them, they're all recorded and they're on the YouTube channel, that Great Basin National Park Foundation YouTube channel. So we'll also have that information for you. And if you're not familiar with Great Basin National Park Foundation, we're the nonprofit partner of Great Basin National Park. And we do a lot of things to support the park and its mission and to help it, help the park, beyond congressional budgets. And that takes many different, it takes really a community of support to join in and to support the parks we love. So thank you for coming this evening, for supporting Great Basin National Park, and for being excited to learn more. So tonight we have three amazing women who are our speakers. And I'm just going to do a really brief introduction, and then I'm going to turn it over to them. The plan for this evening is that Jean Howerton's going to go first, and then we're going to go to Louise Hose, and then to Gretchen Baker. And what we'd like to do is, if at any time during the program you have a question, or if you would like to make a comment, there's two different ways you can do that. Down at the bottom of your screen, you should see a chat function, which a lot of you have already put in where you're from in the chat, so thank you. And there's also a Q&A. And if you don't see the Q&A, it might be under more, but you can put your questions either. We'll find them. They might be a little easier for us to find them in Q&A. So if you do see that, maybe put your questions in there. And our goal is that we'll finish our program certainly before the end of the hour, and then we'll do all of our questions after that. So we may stay for another 10 or 15 minutes after the hour, finishing up those questions, because it's nice to have that interaction. So first, we're going to hear from Jean Howerton, who was the first girl guide in Lehman Caves. She's going to give us some history and stories from that time period. Then we're going to move on to Louise Hose, who is a geologist, and she's really the preeminent researcher of the geology of Lehman Caves and has discovered a lot of neat things. And then from there, we're going to go to the park's ecologist and cave specialist, Gretchen Baker, who's, she just knows everything about the caves at Great Basin National Park, everything and more. So without further ado, Jean, let me turn it over to you, and you can share your screen and say hello.
Okay, we're going to think this works.
Okay.
Okay, hey, so I have to do one more thing. How do I get it bigger? Oh, here, on the corner.
I think I don't see it yet, so you might need to share it.
I'm trying to share it up here in the corner. Oh, it didn't. It worked before. Let me see. Okay, let me go out again, because it's up there, but it's not. Okay, so
no worries. Everyone these days is very patient with that.
This is what I think I do.
Yes, with technology. You've got it. Awesome.
Work. Let's see. So if I can.
And then yep. Perfect.
There we go. Okay. Thank you, Aviva. I'm Jean Sharp. Howerton, and I was the first girl guide in Lehman Caves. A series of fortuitous events allowed this to happen, but it took 12 years. In the 1880s, a rancher named Absalom Lehman noticed a cave and started exploring. It was a fabulous cave, and soon he was taking people on tours, charging them a fee. 40 years later, in 1922, Lehman Caves became a national monument covering 1 square mile. I fell in love with caves when I was 9 years old, and this is how it progressed. I grew up on the Blue Eagle Ranch in a remote part of Nye County, and our life was very much like Little House on the Prairie. No electricity, no running water. My mom homeschooled us, my sister and me, until 1955, when my sisters and cousins were old enough to open a school. So this is me, actually 1957, my older sister Carol, and then my 2 little sisters and my cousins. So when we got a school, then the Nevada State Library in Carson City would send us big boxes of books, and we kept them for 6 weeks and then traded them back for new ones. And in one of the boxes, there was a book on caves. I read it and I was hooked. Also at age 9, I started keeping diaries. And so if I give some exact dates and you think, wonder how she knew that, they're all written down in my diaries. I made my first trip into a cave, into Lehman Caves, on July 11th, 1958. And what I remember most was that the guide had a little mallet and he was playing tunes on the pipe organ on these stalactites. But eventually that started breaking them, so that was stopped before I ever became a cave guide. Another thing that happened was our family subscribed to National Geographic magazine. And in one issue, a female park ranger was showing kids formations in Carlsbad Caverns. And I decided right then and there, I wanted to be a cave guide. At age 11, I wrote to Carlsbad Cavern National Park, asking how I could become a guide. And I received a reply right away and said they didn't hire young people, that I should pursue my interest in school and study science and nature and then apply for a position. So I did. I went to the University of Nevada. I studied geology, astronomy, chemistry, botany, biology, and got a degree in elementary education. February 1968, I applied to be a seasonal guide at Lehman Caves. March 30th, I received a rejection letter saying they didn't hire girls, and I was crushed. But later that same day, I got a phone call saying that one of the male seasonal guides had backed out. And I guess in desperation, they asked me to come for an interview. So April 10th, I drove to Lehman Caves, had the interview, and I got the job. Since I was the only female ranger, I was given my own little cabin built in 1940. It was about the same size as our schoolhouse, so I felt at home. I ordered my official Park Service uniform. The skirt hit mid-calf. This was the 60s, so I hemmed it up to mid-knee. I got my name, my name tag, which I'm actually wearing today. You can see the name tag that I have on my jacket. And the Ely Daily Times published an article, Girl Guide at Lehman Caves. I started giving cave tours. Now, when animals go into a cave, they adapt their bodies to life in the cave. They might lose pigment, lose eyesight, grow long antenna. But humans adapt the caves to their own needs by making changes. So I want you to notice these early visitors. The women are wearing long white dresses. You have men in ties and suit jackets and stuff. And it was very difficult to get into the cave in those early days. The entrance was a hole in a limestone cliff. Then there was a drop. And then you kind of scrambled down, and they built a wooden ladder that took you down into the cave. So that made it a lot easier. But still, it was hard. So in 1939, they dug a tunnel to intersect the cave at the end of that staircase. Now, if you open up a tunnel, that would change the airflow in the cave. So to keep the airflow natural, they had 2 heavy wooden doors. You would open the first door, go into the tunnel, and all the people would walk in, and you'd close that door. Then at the other end, you would open that door, and then people would go through it, and you'd close it like an airlock. So it kept the cave a little bit more natural. When the cave was first explored, there were formations filling all the spaces everywhere. It was very, very hard to get around. So it took sledgehammers and even dynamite to clear paths so people could move through the cave. And one section, you would go behind and then you'd have to crawl down on your belly. And this is called Fat Man's Misery. And a lot of caves have a feature called Fat Man's Misery. So they dug a passageway around this formation. So they just opened it up and they called it the Panama Canal. Then they would pave very nice trails and make sure that there were no stalactites that would hit you on the head as you went through. And they did guardrails and staircases. So they really fixed the cave up to make it easier for people to go through. So that was the first adaptation, just getting around in the cave. The second big adaptation was lighting the cave. Caves, I guess you could say, are dark. And early visitors would use candles and lanterns and carbide lights to find their way through the cave. When they would go through Fat Man's Misery, then they went to a place where the ceiling was pretty low, and they could take their candles and carbide lamps and actually soot their initials or names onto the ceiling. And this is called the inscription room. And you can still see a lot of those up there when you go on a tour. But the historic practice stopped when Lehman Caves became a national monument. Now, electric lights were installed first in 1941, but the problem was the lights encouraged algae growth and it would turn the areas green. So to minimize algae growth, they minimized how often the lights were in a section of the cave. So when you would come into the cave, there was a switch and the guide would turn on that switch and then it would light that part of the cave. And then as you left that area, then that light was turned off and the next light to the next section was turned on. And it was good for crowd control. You could say, no, keep up or you'll be left in the dark. So on one tour, this is kind of a map of how you went to the cave. You have the entrance and then you go through the passageways. And now the tours stop here, but we used to go up this area into this back talus room and then out through here. So one day we were in the back of the cave right about here and the transformer blew and we were plunged into darkness. So you'll notice that I'm holding two flashlights. Mostly those were used to show little point out features in the cave, but also they could be used for just this, a lack of power. So it's a small group. I gave one flashlight to the last person in the group. And then I led the group out to as soon as we got in here, then that transformer was on and the lights were there again. It only happened once. Early tours focused on what is known as cave fantasy, naming cute objects in the cave that looked like something. It was fun and it was memorable. And, you know, this one you could see why they would call this the angel's wing. And there was one that was a deer, looked like he was lying down and looking at you, the giant's ear, and so on. By the time I got there in 1968, that was trending from fantasy toward actual science in the cave. So that's why Louise and Gretchen are going to give you the scientific parts of being in the cave. So Lehman Caves became part of Great Basin National Park in 1986. And of course, we are celebrating the 40th anniversary this year. So the little girl who at age 11 decided to become a cave guide and reached her goal, she would like to leave you with a life lesson. Follow your dreams and persevere. Thank you very much. Okay, so how do I get out of this? Oh, there we go.
Jean, maybe you can
Something.
take your video off and because I don't see Louise right now.
I don't either. So let me go. Okay. here we go. Let me get it. See if I can end the slideshow. There, I think I got it. Did that go away?
Well, no, we're good in that. I see Louise's slideshow.
And then I can take myself off.
Yes, perfect.
Okay, that was great, Jean. It's love to hear stories like that. So I'm going to be talking about the geology and specifically not so much the geology that makes Lehman like other caves, but the geology that makes Lehman really special. It is very unique. And so I want to talk about that today. The traditional story of how caves form is as you go around the country and visit caves and get stories from guides and other commercial caves, they usually will tell you about how rain falls and snow melts, and as it passes first through the atmosphere and then through the ground and the soil, it picks up carbon dioxide and makes a weak acid known as carbonic acid, which is the same as club soda. And that's what you hear most of the time. And it looks more or less like this diagram, which is actually a Park Service diagram of how caves form. But Lehman Caves is a hypogenic cave, which means it formed from groundwater rising from deeper in the earth instead of the more common top-down origin story of caves. Most caves in the Great Basin province, in fact, form from rising waters. We know that Lehman caves form from hypogenic processes because of all the cupolas, which are blind ceiling domes, half tubes and ceiling channels, and other such features. Most caves that you visit around the country won't have, or even the world, won't display these kind of features. Lehman's whole geometry is a little different looking than most caves. In addition, we have strong evidence that Lehman Cave was dissolved mostly by sulfuric acid, not carbonic acid, which is a real difference because sulfuric acid is basically battery acid and carbonic acid is club soda. It's not really surprising that caves in this region would be mostly hypogenic and formed from rising, warm, sulfide-rich groundwaters. I mean, it makes sense because there are extensive warm and hot springs and young volcanoes throughout the basin and range. But our compelling evidence that sulfuric acid was involved are features called pseudoscallops and an ancient acid pool in the gypsum annex passage of the cave. If you look at this picture, the notch near the floor on both walls was at the level of an ancient sulfide-rich, so acidic pool of water when the cave was forming. The pool has been dried for millions of years, but the evidence is still there. Those rills or those grooves in the walls resulted from dripping and flowing sulfuric acid in the cave when it was forming. And one of the compelling things is the pseudoscallops that are on the wall. Pseudoscallops are divots in the limestone wall or marble wall that formed when concentrated sulfuric acid etched the rock. They look and form similar to the surface of a weathered cattle salt lick, if you're familiar with these items. And they tell the geologists that the cave was formed by sulfuric acid. One of the most notable statistics about the cave is how very old it is, probably older than any other cave that you have been in. It is tough to get a date on how old a cave is, but we can determine the age of the speleothems, or cave decorations, within the cave, and that gives us a minimum age for the void itself. Speleothems can't be deposited unless there's a void for them to form in. Extensive cave mammillaries, like those seen on the left here, these are from Carlsbad Caverns, and are commonly deposited when groundwater that formed the cave starts to recede and drop. That water is super concentrated with dissolved minerals near the top of the groundwater or the aquifer, and the water deposits a coating of calcite on the walls. When well developed, this coating forms a cave deposit we call mammillaries. Well-developed mammillaries in a nearby cave called Indian Burial Cave were successfully dated a few years ago using radiometric decay of uranium to lead. And that technique found that the mammillaries in that cave were over 13 million years old. And this is not very far from Lehman. Thus, we started looking for cave mammillaries in Lehman for several years and finally found some immediately under the natural entrance that Jean showed pictures of. Victor Polyak of the University of New Mexico obtained a very good date for these Lehman mammillaries of about 4 million years old. Thus, Lehman has to be more than 4 million years old. But because of several other caves that have dates of more than 10 million years, we think the cave is probably 10 million years old. Either way, Lehman is a very old cave. This calcite speleothem here in the center is called folia, and it has been recorded in only 31 other caves worldwide. Folia are commonly associated with mammillaries, as they are products of a water table dropping and the air starting to fill the cave chamber. Mammillaries grow in supersaturated water, typically in a retreating thermal groundwater near or below the water table. They are formed in similar conditions, but typically grow on top of mammillaries, a bit closer to the top of the water table. You can see these folia actually in the entrance tunnel, and probably you've never had a guide show them to you, but they're pretty interesting because they are so unusual worldwide. Another feature that is quite unusual is the mineral metatiaminite. It is a yellow uranium vanadium mineral that has only been found in a few caves worldwide. And all of those caves are hypogenic sulfidic caves. So we thought maybe this would be a really old mineral, and since it had uranium, it'd be easy to date. But when Victor dated it, he found it was only 170,000 years old, so it formed long after the cave dissolved. Cave turnips are poorly understood, and they are quite rare as speleothems. However, there's an abundance of them in Lehman, and on the tourist trail you will see many of them. Lehman might have more examples than any other explored cave in the world. How did they form? Why did they form? We don't know. Personally, I suspect it has something to do with microbes, but as a geologist, when I can't understand something, I always blame it on some sort of biology. They are elsewhere in the east central Nevada region, and I even saw some in a New Zealand cave about a month ago. But they are unusual. In Lehman, they are spectacular and common. If Lehman didn't have so many spectacular shields, its reputation would probably focus on its unique collection of turnips. And of course, Lehman has more than 500 cave shields. Why? Well, we don't completely understand, but shields grow out of fractures in bedrock walls, ceilings, and floors. Lehman Cave's bedrock has a couple of distinctive qualities. First, it is a metamorphic rock, which means it has been placed under tremendous pressure and associated heat that eliminated any pore space, holes, or fractures in the original rock. Then, as the mountain rose and the pressure was released, the rock became brittle and formed extensive fractures. Thus, water seeping down through the overlying bedrock, long after the original cave formed, came into the cave through these cracks, which provided perfect conditions for shields to form. So this is certainly not a complete list of the things that makes Lehman Caves unique, but it is perhaps a good list of some of the most compelling things that makes it a unique cave. It is a hypogenic cave. It is dissolved by rising warm groundwater. And I will say that Carlsbad Caverns has a lot of parallels. The caves have a lot of parallels in how they formed. But most other caves that you might go into, say Mammoth Cave or Luray Caverns back east, did not form this way. Sulfuric acid was part of or largely responsible for dissolving the cave. This is true for Carlsbad Caverns as well. Lehman Caves is very old. It is certainly older than 4 million years, and it's likely more than 10 million years old. The cave contains folia, which is quite unusual worldwide. It contains metatiaminite, a very unusual mineral. It has over 1,000 cave turnips, and the cave contains more than 500 cave shields. So Lehman Caves, geologically, is not just another roadside attraction. So now Gretchen's going to talk about the special and interesting biology of the cave.
Thanks, Louise. It's been great hearing Jean's stories and hearing about why Lehman Caves is special. And I'd like to take you all underground with me and dive into some other components of the caves. Oh, oops. There's a little lag there. So we know we have the geology where caves are, and now let's talk about what lives in the caves.
Hey, Gretchen. Oh, perfect. Now where I'm seeing the second slide.
Okay.
Okay.
Good. So caves are homes to a lot of different creatures. And so we are, as humans, are visitors to these caves. But we have things that live either temporarily or permanently in the caves. And so we're going to dive a little deeper into those. And let's start with the bats. The bats are one of definitely a crowd pleaser. I'm having trouble going forward, so I'm not sure why this is. Okay, there we go. So we have approximately 11 different bat species in the park that we know of. Lehman Caves is a very important place for these bats, especially the Western or Townsend's big-eared bats. We have a maternity colony in the summertime of about 50 to 100 bats. And that has not always been the story, though, because when Absalom Lehman came across the cave in 1885, he covered it up so that he could charge for people to go into the cave. And over the years, that cave entrance was blocked by boards, and later there was concrete with a bubble over it. And it wasn't until the late 1990s that a bat cupola was placed over the natural entrance of the cave. This allowed bats to go back into the cave, and that's that weird metal structure with the slats. That is wide enough for bats to circle up and then fly in or out of there. And that works for bats, but if they had forgotten about the cave, which they had since generations hadn't been in there, took some time for them to start remembering. But fortunately, we have the bats have refound the cave, and now we have a successful maternity colony of the western big-eared bats. Another really fun animal that likes to go into caves at Great Basin are pack rats, also known as wood rats, and they are in almost every cave. And they're so cool. They're cute. um, they also bring in material from the outside into the cave. And so they'll bring in little twigs, they'll bring in needles and leaves and vegetation, and they won't bring it in from very far. They'll only go for about 100 meters outside of the cave entrance, and they'll bring in this different vegetation, and they build up these nests, and they can get quite large. And in fact, they pass them down from generation to generation. And they use their urine, cements it all, and they can become really large. We were digging in one, doing a paleontological excavation in a Forest Service cave nearby, and we were more than elbow deep, and it still was like very compacted, and it still kept going, and I don't know how big it was. And I've been to some pack rat middens that are taller than I am when I'm standing. And in fact, some of them can be thousands and even tens of thousands of years old. And so we can learn what kind of vegetation is around based on that. And so nowadays around Lehman Cave, we have pinyon and juniper trees. But if you go back 10,000 years, you find bristlecone pine and limber pine sign in those middens. And so those were the trees that were growing around the cave about 10,000 years ago. And then we're going to talk about some of the other critters that live in the cave. I'm kind of partial to the really tiny things. And so I find them very cute, even though they might not be as charismatic as some of the bigger things like bats and pack rats. But the springtails are all over the cave, but they're very hard to see. They're only about the size of a piece of dandruff, but they sure can jump. They have a special appendage that lets them jump up to 17 times their length. And so if you see something really small that's just like a speck and it moves quickly, you're probably not imagining it. It's a little springtail. And we have over 8 species known in Lehman Cave, which is super cool. We also have a bunch of, we have 2 different species of cave millipedes that are in the park caves. They're tiny, but they are amazing because they are detrivores and they break down old wood that might get washed into the cave. Or in the case of Lehman, they break down some of those old wooden staircases. There are still pieces of wood in the cave from over 100 years ago, and those cave millipedes are helping to clean that up. On the bottom left is a dipleuron, and the dipleuron is super rare. In fact, there are very few dipleuron experts in the whole world, and we don't even have a single name for any of our dipleurons. They are probably new species to science, something yet to be discovered and found out more about. And then on the lower right is the Great Basin cave pseudoscorpion, only known from a few caves in the park and an area. And this Great Basin cave pseudoscorpion was first found in Lehman Caves in 1930 by the superintendent of the cave, but it wasn't identified until 1960 because it can take a long time to find the right specialist to do that identification. And these pseudoscorpions are only about an inch long, but they are fierce. They have these pincers and they will grab their prey, and then they will use their venom glands to inject their venom into their prey, which basically dissolves all the insides of their prey. And then they're able to slurp it up and eat them just like a nice smoothie. For things to make these caves a home, especially on a permanent basis, they have adapted. So in some cases, the eyes have totally disappeared because the natural environment in a cave is totally dark. The appendages may be longer because they are using their feet, legs to find their way around and using those appendages as touching. And so they can't see it, so they got to feel their way through. They sometimes have lost all their pigment because they no longer need any protection from sunlight and UV. Their feeding can be like a feeding frenzy when they do find food, but they can also go long periods of time without eating at all. And that has changed their metabolism so that it can ramp up quickly sometimes, but then it can also be very close to dormant for long periods of time too. Reproduction can also be pretty sporadic with When they have enough food, they might quickly reproduce. And then their lifespan is often longer than their cousins out on the surface. Oops. So we have a number of endemic species found in the caves around here. That means endemic means they're only found in this area, nowhere else in the world. And so that's pretty cool. So the pseudoscorpion, that harvestman, which is pictured on the right, it's like daddy longlegs, just beautiful orange color when they're adults. Couple millipede species, an amphipod that's on the lower right, and that is similar to a freshwater shrimp. We only know it from one cave, and we don't even see it every time we go in the cave. The water levels have to be just right. A new springtail, 6 new flies, and probably some more things to come once we find the right taxonomist for it. So that's kind of a quick overview of some of the things that live in the caves. Now I'd like to turn to, let's look at Lehman Caves a little bit more. Jean and I both love this beautiful photo of the Grand Palace with the parachute shields. The people have been really enjoying Lehman Caves for over 100 years. It's the oldest cave open in Nevada for public visitation. And we still have visitation today. We have a variety of different tours. The 30-minute tour just visits the first couple of rooms of the cave. And the 60-minute lodge room tour goes in the entrance tunnel and then makes a big loop and comes out the exit tunnel. The 90-minute tour goes to the Grand Palace where the beautiful parachute shield is. And in this photo, this is something that was photographed first in 1928. And the photo was found in the Library of Congress, and Matt Bowers had it reproduced with Dave Bunnell coming to take the photos again in 2016. And there are a number of places in the cave where these photos were retaken, and it made me feel really good because there was actually very little change from 1928 photos to the 2016 photos. So there are definitely parts of the cave that were broken, but it appears that most of that damage was done before 1928, and that having all these tours throughout the years has not caused a lot of damage to the cave. And so that, as a cave manager, makes me feel really good. We also last year started a 3-hour introduction to wild caving tour, and that follows part of an old tour route that went into the talus room, the biggest room in the cave. And also it goes a little bit into the Beeman Annex, which has a little bit of a crawlway in there and some really neat formations. And it's super exciting to have this opportunity for people to have a chance to go back into that talus room and see a totally different part of the cave. As you can see from this photo, it's not full of decorations. It looks really different than other parts of the cave. It almost feels like you're in a different cave. And so it's a neat opportunity for those who are willing to go through a little rougher part of the cave. I'm a scientist, so I like to have graphs. So here's just one graph, cave and park visitation. And this starts with the 1922 dedication of Lehman Caves National Monument. It's kind of cool seeing that photo because there are a lot fewer trees on the hills back then. And as you can see, the cave visitors in the reds increased quite a bit up into the 1970s, and little decline into the 80s, and then another big peak. And then it kind of is leveled off, but the blue really starts going up in about 1986 when Great Basin National Park was formed, and that included Lehman Caves National Monument. What we're finding is that our overall park visitation keeps increasing, but our cave visitation is fairly leveled off. And that's partly due to having a limited number of guides and what our cave capacity is. So we're not trying to focus on cave quantity and the number of people who can go in there, but we really want to have a really good quality experience for those who do go in the cave. And in order to do that, we've been doing a whole bunch of projects, and these have been funded by the Southern Nevada Public Lands Management Act, or SNPLMA. And two of the projects that have focused on Lehman Caves are an infrastructure and electrical project. And so some key points for these projects are we're getting a brand new cave lighting system to replace the one that was installed in 1977. In fact, part of that lighting system failed a couple years ago, and that part of the cave has been closed for the last 2 years. And people have had to go in and out of the exit tunnel to access the cave. With this new cave lighting system, we'll have the whole regular 90-minute tour route back open, and we'll have the ability for the guides to focus the light on special features in different rooms and hopefully reduce the amount of algae that grows near some of the lights, because we'll have more switches and smaller amounts of lights will be on in the cave at any one time. We also have this new cave map. We've shown it a few times. I think actually Jean and Louise and I all have shown it because we're so excited to have this new cave map. Shane Fryer and Cindy Walk from Carson City took the lead on this, and lots of people came out to help with resurveying and remapping the cave. And we have a beautiful profile for it now, and we know exactly how far below the surface certain passages are. And it's really nice to have the updated to more modern standards map. We've also had a virtual cave tour made of the cave route, and lots of side little videos about what is the civil defense room and what was stored in there, and what about some of the inscriptions in the cave. And so there's lots of cool videos, and you can find that on the park's YouTube page. And it's well worth your time because there's lots of cool things that you don't necessarily get to see on your cave tour while you're in the park, but you get to see with this beautiful lighting, and it was done with LiDAR. And so like it's very crisp, lots of good detail in that video. We have a new white nose syndrome decon station. This is trying to help us keep white nose at bay as long as we can. That's a fungal disease that affects bats, and we want to keep our bats as safe as possible. So all the people who enter the cave walk across this little foot bath that has hydrogen peroxide in it, and that is to kill the spores that they might be carrying on their feet and keep the bats a little safer. In the cypress swamp, we used to have a trail that acted as a dam, and the cypress swamp is a wet area in the cave, and the water would just rest in the pools and it wouldn't be able to flow back and forth. And part of this project was to replace that and put in this bridge, and so now water can go back and forth. Since we've replaced it, we've had 2 really dry years, and we actually haven't had water in that room, but we were going to get to see it in action, hopefully before too long. We also have installed a door at the west room to restore the natural airflow, because this was an area of the cave that was blasted out to make a tunnel connection. But since it was not natural, we wanted to make that airflow more natural in the cave. In the inscription room, we have a bench that has been extended, so now the whole tour group can sit down. And in the sunken garden, the platform has been enlarged so that more people can go out and see that beautiful last room of the 90-minute tour. So all this started by writing a Lehman Caves management plan that was finished in 2019. But in addition to Lehman Caves, we also wrote a Wild Caves and Karst management plan. Why did we need that? Because there are 39 more caves in the park, and they are pretty awesome. We have some high elevation caves. There are a number of them that are over 10,000 feet. We have some caves that are filled with water. They might be accessible in the winter months, but then in the spring when we have peak flow, so that they can fill up with water to the point where we can't enter them at all. We do have a lot of tight caves. It's good to like crawling if you want to go visit some of these other caves. We also have talus caves that are just basically big boulders that you climb into, but they are also homes to a variety of cave life. About 1/3 of the caves are vertical, and so we need ropes to access them, and we rappel down and then have to climb those ropes to get back out of the caves. And this one on the far right is a special cave, kind of a biologist's dream, but probably a lot of other people's worst nightmare. It is a midden slurry, so it is that pack rat poop mixed with water. We wear fishing waders to go into it, and it kind of feels like you're walking in quicksand and you're never sure if you're going to be able to quite get out of it. And we have had to pull each other out of it. Back up to some of the caves that are really different. Up at our higher elevations, we have 3 caves that have perennial ice in them. One of them is Long Cold Cave, which also has a new beautiful map due to a Snuffloma project. And it's just really unexpected to be in the Great Basin Desert and have these caves that have this perennial ice in them. There's been a variety of different cave research done. Louise mentioned the mammillary dating, which got some really old dates. We've had a stalagmite dated to 2.2 million years old in Lehman Cave. We do a variety of cave climate. Outside of a cave, you have your normal hot in the day, cold at night, different variation over the summer and winter. But inside a cave, if you go back deep enough, it's just pretty much a flat line. It's yeah, kind of a very boring graph, but that actually is really good for looking at long-term climate. We've been working with some scientists to study some of that cave ice I mentioned. And there was recently looking at what cave microbes live in the ice that's in the cave. There's some invertebrates and genetic studies. We have some researchers looking at the hydrology in Model Cave. Something we're going to be doing more of is using LiDAR to find different cave features. We've done some camera traps at cave entrances and found out that animals like ringtails and mountain lions like to go in caves, even though we never see them while we're in the caves, thankfully. They do use the caves too. So another SNP project has focused on wild caves, and this was a joint project between the Forest Service and the National Park Service. And as part of it, we hired a dream team. So this is the picture of our initial dream team with Louise Hose, Bree Patterson, Peter Drishke, Jean Kreitcha, and Shyla McCollum, who cover a whole bunch of different disciplines. Doug Powell from the Forest Service and myself from the Park Service supervised them, and they spent a year and a half visiting all these different caves and gathering information about them and writing reports. Lisa Gilbert later joined us and helped with this project, and we have like 1,500 pages about the caves of Eastern Nevada. And so we know so much more about them now. We also know where our data gaps are. And so that's actually really helpful to know what else we need to do. Also, as part of the Snipluma Wild Caves project, we were able to purchase a cave sim trailer that is located near the Lower Visitor Center in Great Basin National Park. And we're the only national park to have a cave sim currently. And this is super cool because it is basically over 100 feet of cave passage that's in a mobile trailer. So we're hoping that we can take it to schools and maybe the county fair and let people experience what it's like to go into a wild cave. And so you go in, you crawl around, there are formations, they beep if you touch them. There are places where you have to decide if you go up or down, if you go left or right. And there are things for you to try to find, like, can you find the rescue cache? And can you find the pack rat in there? And it's a really fun experience. I tell people that it's not playing a video game, you are actually in the video game. We also, as part of the project, had a rock art condition assessment of pictograph caves and are working on getting some interpretive signs near the entrance of those caves so people can understand a little bit more about them. An ethnographic study that interviewed the local tribes on what they think about caves. And as I mentioned earlier, that wild cave tour, that was also funded by the Snipluma project. So what's next? Well, we have lots of fun cave projects going on. First up is to finish the Lehman Caves electrical installation, and we are hoping that that will be finished by late July. And then after that is all installed, we have some restoration of Lehman Caves to do, and so we have two scientists in the cave, or scientists in the park, cave assistants, that will be here for the next year to help with restoration of Lehman Caves and other cave projects. Now, I know a lot of people like restoration, and we have had a lot of lit and restoration camps here at Great Basin in the past, and we plan to continue doing those and also continue doing wild cave tours and having more cave sim opportunities so people can see the wilder side of caves. We're going to be working on that pictographs cave project, doing a karst inventory of the park using LiDAR, various different surveys, reviewing our cave management plans so we keep them as up to date as possible. We're going to keep training park staff And fingers crossed, maybe be able to prepare a next Simplema grant proposal so that we can keep building on what's been done already and keep learning more about the fantastic caves here. So I'd like to thank you everyone for being here and joining us for this presentation and for Cave Week. Thanks for your interest in the Great Basin Caves. And I'd also like to thank Great Basin National Park Foundation for sponsoring this virtual speaker series and helping to celebrate this 40th anniversary of Great Basin National Park. Although we can't see the caves most of the time because we're on the surface, when we do take the time to go underground, it's a whole nother magical world. And I'm excited that you're here to learn a little bit more about it. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Gretchen and Louise and Jean. That was really super fun. We got to really cover a lot of topics and a lot of information there. So I know there are questions in the Q&A and probably also in the chat. Claire, would you, if there's a lot of questions in the chat, would you like me to do the Q&A and you do the chat and we kind of go back and forth?
Questions in the chat. I've only seen one there so far, so we can start with that and then transition to all of the questions in the Q&A.
Okay.
From the chat, Robert Reiner is wondering, what was the civil defense passage? I believe Robert may have noticed that on a map during one of your presentations. Would anyone like to describe what the civil defense passage was or what might have merited that name?
Sure, it was used during the Cold War to store supplies. And so there were 55 gallon barrel drums of saltines and hard candy and bathroom supplies. And the idea was that if their bombs were dropped here, people could go in the cave and take shelter. And Jean might want to talk more about this. She's got lots of information about, atomic.
I'm a downwinder. We were we were right off the test site, straight north. And so we got bombs flying over us. Well, not the clouds flying over us. And so, yeah. And I remember the civil defense stuff in the cave because that was part of our history growing up. So I won't take too much time, but yeah, that's a whole nother webinar.
I'll just go chronologically through the questions we've received in the chat. The first question is from Paula Clark. Is the shield formation carbonic as opposed to sulfuric? I believe, Louise, that came in during your presentation, Louise.
Yeah. The speleothems, all the deposits and decorations really have to do with carbonic acid formation. When I talked about the sulfuric acid, we're talking millions of years ago, but all those decorations and shields formed fairly recently. Most of them are, when they're dated, are on the order of a few 100,000 years, which is young in this cave. And that has to do with water coming in from the surface, going through the rock, dissolving out parts of the rock, and then when they get to the open void of the cave, losing some of the carbon dioxide that makes it carbonic acid and dumping out the mineral deposits.
Louise, Robert Bennett is wondering, can the cave still be accessed via the natural entrance?
Well, that's really a Gretchen question.
No, unless you're a bat or a small critter. The cupola does not have a gate in it, so you can only access the cave through the entrance tunnel or the exit tunnel.
Thanks, Gretchen. And then also for you, Gretchen, I'm assuming, does the age or formation mechanism affect what life is found within the cave?
To be determined. We still have a lot to learn about if there's any differences as far as which geologic formation and comparing that to what the critters are. Currently, we're seeing them across several different ones, but we haven't really had the chance to dive deep and see more of the connection between the geology and biology.
That's great. And I'm going to keep you on the hot seat here for a sec, Gretchen. What is the prey of pseudoscorpions? Coming from Stephen Moore.
It can be springtails. We've seen flies. We've actually even seen pseudoscorpions eating other pseudoscorpions. So they are the top predator in the cave, and they will eat almost anything. When we have mice fall in the cave and die, I've seen pseudoscorpions be attracted to that because then there might be springtails on the mice that they can come and eat.
Awesome. And while we are on the topic of mice, how many middens have been identified in Lehman Caves?
We have never counted them. That could be a project. But dozens, I would say.
And Louise, here's one for you. Do earthquakes play any role in cave geology?
Yes, indeed. The area is quite quiescent right now. It's not in a place, it's one of the few places probably in Nevada that doesn't get earthquakes or sizable earthquakes. But when the caves were forming, they certainly were forming at the same time when there would have been a lot of earthquakes going on. And the cave, you can see how the cave passages are pretty linear, and those are following cracks that we call fractures and faults that formed. But we're talking about things that formed 8 million years ago, not in recent time.
Thank you. Another question on the cave geology lane is, did this guest hear correctly that a lot of rock is metamorphic? And they are hearing, they thought perhaps that karst topography was typically sedimentary limestone.
So,
Louise,
so the cave is in marble, and marble is a metamorphic result of limestone. They're chemically the same. It's just that the limestone has been heated up and put under a lot of pressure. And this particular marble is a little unusual. If you're a geologist, you'll know the term myelinite. And myelinite is a type of rock that forms where there is a fault and incredible shearing pressure on the area. And so this rock formed along a giant fault, which would take too long to explain, but it formed along a giant fault where there was a huge amount of pressure and the rock was turned into marble long before the cave formed.
thank you. And Jean, we have a question for you. What was your favorite part of giving cave tours?
I loved seeing people's reactions and how fun it was to have them see a cave for the first time. And it was really rewarding to have people just their awe. And that, I think that was probably the best part of it, was having them see the cave. And I never lost my wonder of the cave either. And I don't think people do, because it's each time you go in, you see different things. So I would say that would be it.
Thanks, Jean. Another question that we've had come in. How confident are you that Lehman Cave is fully mapped and all leads have been completely explored to termination? Is there a strong likelihood of more caves to be discovered in the park, or not so likely? So I guess that's kind of two questions. How confident are you that Lehman Cave is fully mapped? And is there a strong likelihood of more caves being discovered in the park?
So we were really hopeful when we remapped the cave that we'd find some new passage. And we did find some strong airflow in the west room. That's probably the best lead, but it's in a place with lots of formations and that would have to be broken to get in there. So our current policy for Lehman Caves is that we don't break anything to go find anything more. So until we can figure out some kind of little robot that can go exploring, I think we're at the limit for Lehman Cave. However, I think there are probably a bunch more caves in the park, and we do allow for some ridge walking, and some of the caves that the other wild caves actually have going leads. And so there is still more to be mapped and more to be found.
And kind of on that topic, a real quick question. Are public permits available for the wild caves in Great Basin National Park?
Yes, there are some that are available, and we actually have website page that shows a little bit more information about which caves and what how long they are and if you require horizontal or vertical gear to go into them.
Awesome. And then one last cave tour question. Would you say the cave tour is suitable for someone who's very claustrophobic?
As soon as you get in the cave, you're in the tunnel, and if you can be in the tunnel and be okay, you're all right going through the rest of the cave tour.
Great answer. We had another question come in. What distinguishes pseudo-scallops from regular scallops? How can you tell the difference in Lehman caves?
So regular cave scallops are something that tell us the direction and the velocity that groundwater traveled through the cave with. And so it's kind of funny back, oh gosh, I guess in the 80s, there were some cave guides who were also cavers, and they knew about scallops and they wanted to determine how the water had moved through the cave. And they went in and did incredible amounts of work without really getting any results. And that's because cave scallops are asymmetric. They have a steep side and a gentle side. And they also, so all the scallops in a given area will be asymmetric in the same direction. And they also will all be pretty close to the same size in the same area. The pseudoscallops will be a variety of sizes, and they don't have that asymmetry, or at least not a consistent asymmetry. And they aren't that well known by people who haven't worked in sulfidic caves, so like Carlsbad. Good question.
Nice. Jean, what did you do for fun in the evenings when you were a cave guide?
One of the things, well, we actually did quite a bit of stuff. One of the things we were required to do was we needed to give talks, campfire talks after in the evening, and visitors could come. And so we would do slide presentations, and a couple of us played guitars. So we would end up having a lot of hootenanny, because that was hootenanny time. So we sang a lot. And there was quite a rivalry between the Park Service and the Forest Service. And so we had these volleyball games, and that was a big thing. And we went down to Baker and played pool a lot. And we went and explored caves a bunch too, and we climbed up mountains, and we were pretty active. But everybody kind of groused about having to do the campfire talks. But when you got them going, they were really pretty fun.
Thanks, Jean. A question for Louise. You mentioned the sulfidic groundwater associated with volcanic activity. Do you have any intuition as to whether Lehman caves likely drained suddenly versus gradually, and if the drop in the water table may have been linked to any single volcanic event?
So we don't have good evidence from Carlsbad Caverns, but there is another cave to the north that has mammillary deposits that are more than 1 meter thick, so more than 3 feet thick. These things form very, very slowly. And so based on more modern mammillaries in a place called Devil's Hole over in Death Valley, that rate of the amount of time it would have taken to do 1 meter thick mammillary is about 1 million years. So that is very suggestive that the drop in the water table was very slow. We expect that the drop in the water table was associated with cutting canyons down through the mountains as the mountains rose up during the Basin and Range, probably between about 14 and 8 million years ago, maybe 10 million years ago. During that 4 million year period, the ranges in this area were rising up, and the basins were dropping down, and canyons were being incised. And as those canyons were being incised, the water table was dropping down, but it would have almost certainly been a very slow process.
Please. And then following kind of that same cave geology theme with our last two geological questions that we've gotten, do you find pseudoscallops in Carlsbad caverns, and are they abundant in sulfuric acid or hypogenic caves?
Yes, you do find them in Carlsbad Caverns, and they are, I don't know if abundance is the right word, but we certainly do see them in other relic sulfuric acid caves.
Thanks, Louise. And then one last geology question. Was Lexington Arch a hypogenic process?
Yes, Lexington Arch used to be a hypogenic cave, and the canyon has removed most of the cave and just left that one little piece of it.
And then a final question for Gretchen, kind of regarding what type of masks and other safety equipment you use when you're working in caves, if you're working near a midden, perhaps, various types of safety gear that you use when you're doing your job.
So when we are in really dusty caves, we definitely wear masks. Usually N95 masks are sufficient. And then, yeah, just the normal helmets, knee pads, gloves, lights, and making sure somebody knows where we're going and what time we're supposed to be back.
Perfect. Thank you all. That wraps up all of the questions that we have received so far. So I'll pass it back over to Aviva to close us out.
Yeah, thank you. This was, I think, a really wonderful program. I know that we had over 100 people on, well, 100 Zoomers. So that could be a couple hundred people because there might be a few people per screen joining us tonight. And I think hopefully everyone enjoyed it. We are really happy that we could bring the caves to you wherever you might be during National Cave and Karst Week. So thank you for joining us. We'll be sending a follow-up email. Actually, Claire who did that Q&A so well. Thank you so much, Claire. We'll be sending a follow-up email. We'll give you a link to the next program, as well as a link to the past programs, and also a link to the foundation. So if you're new to the foundation, you can learn more about our work supporting Great Basin National Park and a bunch of various programs and projects that we support. And so we hope that you'll stay part of this community and keep learning more with us. And the next two programs, the ones in July and August, will be centered on the Great Basin Observatory. It's also the 10th anniversary of the Great Basin Observatory. On August 16th is the 10th anniversary of the Great Basin Observatory. So we're taking 2 months to really celebrate that and give you a chance to meet our research partners and professors that work with us on that project. And until then, be well and enjoy a cave. And we hope to see you at the park soon. And thank you so much for joining us tonight.